Yo everybody, it's me, Buster Green, and back in the day I reviewed every episode of FUUTO PIs because I just love Kamen Rider, and seeing a Kamen Rider anime was fucking peak. Anyway, after a couple of years, we finally have a movie, and the movie is sorta out. Well, that's complicated. See, it's been out in Japan for a while now. It came out in theaters last Christmas, and then the Blu-ray came out like 3 months later, about half a year ago in March of Japan time. But its US release has become a very murky situation where currently Crunchyroll has the rights to the series, having obtained them from Funimation, which went under. And Crunchy has just been really dragging their feet on the release of this film. And it's kind of a big mystery and no one knows what's up with it. I really don't have a proper idea of what the holdup is, and at this point I'm kind of concerned. They had a 20-minute preview of the movie at Anime Expo 2024 over a year ago, and it's possible that since 2024 there was maybe a fallout between like Crunchyroll and Toei. I think that's possible because Toei is kind of trying to like take a more aggressive stance in America and try to increase its profits by cutting out middlemen. Maybe it considered Crunchyroll one of those middlemen. So my only guess here is that the reason the movie still isn't out is that Toei was trying to do some greedy shit to self-publish their own movie themselves, and that's why it's taking much longer than usual. Anyway, whatever the situation is, for one reason or another, the movie is still not out in the US, despite vague claims that it should come out any day now. In the meantime, I got totally fed up with the situation, and I said, fuck that. I just booked a flight to Japan, and I watched it there 3 times on a video rental.
この番組はよらんのスポンサーの提供でお送りします。
Oh, and I might as well get into it that I took a massive trip to Japan this week because I had a lot of anime-related tourist trap agendas to carry out there, and I'll get more into that on my next video, and yeah, that'll be a whole video series, but you can just consider this the prologue to my VIG I Went to Japan video. I may as well also mention on this video that I was initially planning this trip to attempt to see Mamoru Nagano's Japan-exclusive anime Gothic Maid, a very obscure sequel to the cult OVA 5-Star Stories, which you can only watch exclusively in Japanese theaters, only to horrifically discover that by the time I got to Japan, most places had stopped playing it, and it was now really hard to find it again. So with that a complete bust, I decided to watch Portrait of Kamen Rider Skull instead, which was an easy rental and easily available to watch. And then because I was kind of stranded in Japan for the week and because the rental didn't expire right away, I ended up watching it 3 more times, trying to use it pretty much to put myself to sleep. And it kind of worked on the basis that it has all the best Kamen Rider W OST tracks from my past, which I'm all nostalgic for. And I technically watched this movie 4 times, but the 3rd and 4th time I completely fell asleep as soon as like 10 minutes into it, so I really don't count those last 2 watches. Okay, anyway, quick non-spoiler review before I get down to spoiling it. This is basically the Begins Night story from Kamen Rider W lore, the first night they became Kamen Rider W. You've heard the story at least like 3 times at this point if you've been like caught up with like all the W media. There was the initial telling in its crossover movie where it had to share half its runtime with the Kamen Rider Decade ending, and then there were a couple of vague flashbacks to it in the series where they just told you the gist of what happens. I think there was also a video game on PS3 that explained it all. So yeah, we're back to the story of Begins Night again. So if you know the story of Begins Night, you know most of this movie already, except I was pleasantly surprised that even though this is very much our 3rd, maybe 4th remake of the Begins Night story, it takes a much better approach to it, and it tries to make it the optimal Begins Night experience. It goes way more into Shotaro's backstory, his motivation for becoming a hero, and it clarifies so many vague things that I guess were there before, but before, because they weren't explained, they were just weird, incomprehensible toku shit, or otherwise they kind of felt like plot holes if you really thought about them too much. Alright, so that's about as far as I can get into the nitty-gritty without going into spoilers. But yeah, at least 50% of this movie is just the same old Begins Night story that you've seen at least 4 times in the past if you're fully caught up with all the Kamen Rider W media released so far. So just keep that in mind if you are like frothing at the mouth to see this movie. It's mostly Begins Night all over again. Alright, so here's my spoiler review. Let's get into it. Portrait of Kamen Rider Skull follows Shotaro from the time he was 12, turning back into the story of Kamen Rider W FUUTO PIs, where we left off at the end of season 1 with him talking to Tokimi and like having some bonding with her. And then it implies that from here they're going to get into season 2 eventually. Anyway, Shotaro is literally narrating the story of Begins Night, which allows him to elaborate on a lot of the vagaries of the original story and explain some shit that previously was there, but maybe it didn't make sense. Maybe there was really no rational reason for why it happened. And in this movie, they try to jump over every possible hoop and every possible hurdle to give it a realistic reason for why it happened. Now, some major things that stood out to me on this one were they fully explained the power set of Kamen Rider Skull and how he is so overpowered because he basically has the ability to be deathless. And I also want to say they better explain the setup of how Sokichi got his driver, why the drivers exist. And I also want to say that since this is a remake of the original prequel movie for the W show, there are a lot of ridiculous scenes in this movie that are just there because they were in the original movie. And in the original movie, those scenes only existed to set up the Kamen Rider W TV show. And so therefore, those scenes are still there. And that gives this movie a whole vibe of, after this, hey, maybe if you really wanted to, you should watch the Kamen Rider W live action TV series. What's even more crazy, though, is that this world probably gives you the best look at the scale and scope of Kamen Rider W's world on a level that I've never really comprehended before, because W's world has no clear beginning point, and it's made even more clear in this movie that when Shotaro tells the story of meeting Kamen Rider Skull as a child, Sokichi has already been working as Kamen Rider Skull for years. He has already been fighting dopants for years. And I find that plot point massively fascinating, massively interesting. What the fuck is this world? What is going on here? Because it's kind of implied on a certain level that the museum group has like a permanent mafiosa hold over FUUTO and was basically using the city as a playground for their dopan experiments and all the unethical crimes they were doing. But the fact it's been going on for so long, completely unchecked, it's fucking fascinating to me. Like, I want to speculate this movie implies that museum has been a thing in FUUTO since like the early 1990s. And that raises so many questions like, when did the dopants start? Where did the dopants start? Is there some like crazy like Shocker Gorgum connection here? Like, is it entirely possible that W just is the aftermath of one of the old Showa Kamen Rider series? These kind of ideas are sort of dangled out there, but kept vague in the most exciting way possible. And that's so fucking cool for me. Like, I'm assuming that most of these questions will just be sensibly answered later on in FUUTO PIs, but the scope they lay out here in this movie is kind of incredible. Also praise FUUTO PI's typical fan servicey animation. In this movie, Sonozaki Sayako is back alive and somehow even more ridiculously sexy than she was in the show, almost to the point of absurdity. Like, you gotta see it to believe it. Anyway, okay, let me see what else was cool in this movie. There was a minor tangent where they speculate that if Sokichi hadn't died in Begins Night, he would have become Kamen Rider W with Philip, and it would have been Cyclone Skull, and that would have been a whole majorly different dynamic, I guess. There's also an original boss fight with an ocean dopant just to pad out the runtime, but this guy kind of sucks and he gets wiped out pretty quickly, and I barely remember him in the end. I will say one thing that majorly did irk me at the movie, I want to say the movie's only flaw is the movie is almost completely devoid of Akiko, almost to like its detriment. And I don't know about you guys, but Akiko is one of my favorite characters in Kamen Rider W, and I was kind of hoping they would just clarify why somehow Sokichi, being one of those badass masculine men in Toku, would abandon his daughter, and how somehow she grew into a total joke Osaka comedian character. Unfortunately, the movie completely glosses over that and doesn't even mention it at all. Akiko is barely in the movie for 5 seconds, so looking back on the Kamen Rider W wiki to answer my own question, the wiki says Sokichi was forced to abandon Akiko because the spider dopant put 2 halves of a bomb inside him and her, and if they ever met up, it would go off. The movie actually starts, I want to say, slightly after this point, but I guess her becoming a clown Osaka comedian was just a reaction to her dad abandoning her, and her mom therefore pushing her not to do well in school. But yeah, otherwise, I don't have too much to say about this movie, otherwise that it's just the definitive version of Begins Night. It is the Begins Night story all over again, but because they clarify so many things that I didn't realize before, it's absolutely worth watching. Philip is also not in this movie too much. He does show up at the end, but he's kind of really strung out, and he kind of acts a little bit like Elf from Death Note more than he would otherwise. But yeah, if you guys have never seen Begins Night, you gotta watch this. It's the definitive version of it. If you have seen one of the other foretellings of Begins Night before, though, It's also worth watching because it clarifies so much. But I will say after watching this, it does feel like it's kind of acting as a replacement for the previous versions. Just like because this is the definitive version, all the previous versions are now obsolete, which is why I guess it still has all the live action story hooks to go into the main Toku 2010 series. But yeah, otherwise, I can't recommend this movie enough. It is the definitive Begins Night movie. It is the definitive Kamen Rider anime movie. It is the best Kamen Rider anime movie we've ever had. It's also possibly the best Kamen Rider movie, or it's like at least up there in terms of Kamen Rider movies. I still kind of like Shin Kamen Rider more, but on a certain level, this also was a more solid story than Shin Kamen Rider. All right, so anyway, that's this movie. I still don't know what the hell is going on with the US release. I heard a rumor that maybe it's coming out next month, as soon as next month, or that it's coming out sometimes this fall. I otherwise don't know, and I got fed up, so I just went to Japan and watched it. Maybe you'll get fed up too and find it your own way, ha ha ha. Otherwise, just fly to Japan and rent it from a video store like I did, because America got rid of video rentals and Japan still has them. All right, my next video will be numerous things and numerous videos about the other things I did on my trip to Japan. Stay tuned. Thank you, everybody. Later.